There you go. All right, I'm calling the Hood River Budget Committee meeting to order. First item of business is introductions. I'm Grant. I was here last year. I don't know what's the flash. I'm generally around.
My name's Gary Reed. The third year here.
I'm Abigail Elder. I'm your new city manager, and this is my first budget season with you.
Will Norris, Finance Director, Assistant City Manager for the city.
Megan Saunders, City Council.
Jessica Meda, City Council.
Tim Cunahan, City Council.
Amberg, first year budget volunteer.
Kate McBride, Mayor.
Do you want to go around the outside too?
You'll say city, please.
Adam Schmidt, Public Works Foreman.
Haley, Allied Management Analyst. And Monica Morris, Admin Services.
Thanks.
And Jen.
And me.
And Jen.
Yeah. We have folks online.
Rudy Kellner, second year budget committee member.
And then the next item of business is to elect officers. So is there anybody who wants to volunteer or appoint anybody to be chair?
I would nominate Grant to be chair.
I'll second that.
Got a motion and a second to nominate me as chair. All those in favor or any discussion? Anybody else want to jump up and volunteer? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great.
Thanks.
Yep, we're doing it.
Congratulations and condolences.
Yep. Vice chair, any nominations or volunteers for vice chair?
I nominate Megan.
Turnabout.
I can't really say anything.
Tim seconded.
Got a motion and a second for Megan to be vice chair. Any further discussion or volunteer on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Congrats. Next up is approval of the meeting minutes from May 12th of 21.
I would move we approve the meeting minutes from May 12th, 2021.
I'll second.
Motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Presentation of the budget message.
Will and I have planned a whole song and dance for you tonight.
Yay.
Since it's the first budget hearing that we've held in person in the last couple of years, that feels very celebratory, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this city budget, I think, is something really to celebrate. Over the last 2 years, the city's really faced some great challenges with the pandemic. I'm really worried about loss of revenue, but I think the city's done a great job of pulling together, being responsive to community needs and making adjustments as needed. I just was telling Gary, yes.
Yep.
That when I came in November, I was really impressed. The city really felt like it was going full speed ahead. The pandemic was definitely steering clear. We were still being socially distant and responsible, but we definitely weren't letting that slow the city down. It's really that was really great and refreshing to see. So the budget is an estimate based on the information we have available to us today, right? It's the revenues that we expect to receive, and it's the anticipated costs that we expect to deliver the services to the community. The past 2.5 years, as we all know, were challenging, but Hood River's really recovered for the most part. Super thankful for the American Rescue Plan Act funds that through, an amazing coincidence, basically made the city whole from its lost revenues. Very, very lucky for that. We'll get to talk about, he's the meat, I am simply the appetizer today. And what's funny is we're both vegetarians, I should have said that. He's got a lot of detail and a lot of graphs for us about the economics, right? That revenues are good, but we're watching a lot of pieces, right? The inflation, increased labor costs, supply chain issues, we'll go into that more detail. But I am confident, I think I speak for Will when I say we, the city, are confident that our revenues are stable and we have a good plan for anticipated costs. Inputs into our budget include the day-to-day operations, what we expect to collect and what we expect to spend, the council work plan, financial policies, and of course, state budget law. While the policies and our projects often get a lot of the attention and detail, really the majority of the city's work is the day-to-day essential services. I think I heard the mayor one day say, if we don't have water and sewer, nothing else is going to matter. And I thought that was a really clear statement about what the city does and what we value. The city owns, so I started with infrastructure. The city owns and maintains more than $100 million worth of water, sewer, roads, physical assets. This budget continues to make significant investments in the community infrastructure that's so important to our town's livability. The budget also, and I have to do a shout out to Haley here, because she works on a lot on securing funding. This budget allows us to access and leverage state, regional funds, congressionally directed funds, which we recently received funds for that, and other opportunities as they come up. The last meeting that we have, we'll go through the capital improvement plan and public works budget, and we'll get a chance to dive into that more deeply. But more than a dozen projects are underway right now. Some of them are invisible, right? They're in the design phases, and some of them probably impacted you on your way here today. You probably saw construction or had to take a detour. But they're investments not only for right now, but for future generations who are going to live here someday. I'm always amazed at water, where we talk about like, what is the next 50 years like? The decisions we make now will affect children and grandchildren of our residents. Public safety is just such another critical piece. And our firefighters, our paramedics, and our officers were really stretched this year and last year with the pandemic. They never got a day off. They continue to work 24/7, and I always think they are there for us on our very worst days. They see us when we are in our most difficult times. This budget contains 3 notable additions into public safety. The first one is a large one-time transfer from the general fund to the fire EMS equipment replacement fund. As we think about the cost of steel and cost of equipment, we know, I'm so thankful that Chief Damien took a good hard look at our equipment and vehicle replacement schedule and really saw that those costs were rising faster than what we were saving. So we have a catch up of $448,000, $800,000. That's a lot, but it's going to put us in a good spot for the future as we plan for those vehicles. The second recommendation and biggest one is that I'm recommending that we add an officer to our police department. I think we all know our population has grown, not just the numbers, but also the complexity of the things we ask our police to handle, criminal issues and social issues. And we have really stretched them. Officers have reported not taking vacations or other leaves because they don't want to burn out their fellow officers. They are at times delaying non-mandatory trainings. And our command staff and detective who they routinely take patrol in order to help out, but that means that they have to either find extra time to do some of their work, or they have to delay some of those non-urgent projects in order to move forward. So I can't promise you that we'll get more ticket revenue or more arrests or more, but I do think that, unless we can promise that, no. And I don't know that that's what we want, right? That's not what we're looking for. When I think of an additional officer, it's really about the health and safety of our department, retaining qualified and excellent officers who want to stay here because they find that good work-life balance and are able to do the very best work on the road every day. And can provide the best possible service to our community. So we'll dive more deeply into that when we get to the police budget next week. And then of course, there's a small amount of money in this year's budget. I think it might be carryover, it might have been there, I'm not sure if it was there last year, to study the possibility of a facility with the county that would be a courthouse, sheriff, and police, and maybe some other services. I think that's been lingering out there for a while. I really hope that this is the year where we can gain clarity about what that might look like and if we want to move forward. So we have some money in there for a facility study. Really looking for the county to be the lead on that because they would be more than 2/3 of the square footage of the facility. So we'll see how that goes this year, but we put that money aside just in case. My third main essential service the city provides is to regulate the built environment through a series of code and regulation. We get to say no to a lot of people, but we also get to say yes to a lot of really fantastic things. These community standards dictate things like how close buildings are together, right? How tall our buildings might be, how much green space we have in the city, really all those things that impact our quality of life. In addition to supporting private development, City Council and staff have also taken a number of initiatives to improve the affordability and livability of the river. Some of those include the hopefully soon to be adopted affordable housing strategy that we just heard about on Monday night. Clarification of the city's dated zoning code. I think that's been an identified need for a couple of years now. Reviewing rules for parklets and food carts. Reviewing our code enforcement practices, looking at what we might change and what best practices might be. And then, of course, working on the next phase of the 780 Rand Road development. So excited about that. People are already asking us about how they can get on a waiting list for 780 Rand Road, and we haven't even started to turn dirt. And of course, I have to say that none of those essential services and none of the staff who do those essential services would be possible if we didn't have the staff who support. Our finance department works quietly and carefully, but they touch everything from court to utility billing to IT to the most important, payroll. And then of course, our city recorder works quietly behind the scenes, but supports me and city administration and city council, and that includes a lot of night meetings. So thank you, Jen. In February, council affirmed their goals for a more inclusive, engaged, well-maintained, sustainable, and resilient community with housing, transportation, parks, and open spaces as priorities. These are the projects that council selected this year as their priorities. I've touched on a bunch of them as I've gone through kind of essential services. I will note two of them. One, affordable housing strategy and safe routes to schools. You'll see there's a placeholder in the budget. We don't exactly know what the projects might be, but we definitely wanted to set aside some funds so that we were ready for those opportunities as they come up. And then finally, our most important resource, our most experienced and talented and expensive resource are our staff. In the first couple of months here, staff have impressed me with their dedication, their brilliance, their professionalism, their expertise, and they've been really generous and kind as I've been learning the ropes. But as we are going through, we're monitoring lots of pieces we talked about in department heads. Leadership has some more detail and statistics to share with you. Things we're thinking about going forward are being able to retain and attract staff. The cost of housing makes it difficult. We know we lose some staff just not being able to really settle in and start a family in this area. As the city grows in both size and complexity, departments will need additional staff resources to keep up. Particularly fire, planning, and engineering all will need help if they're going to continue to maintain and grow service levels. I think we also need to weigh the value and the cost of outsourcing the city, and I think Will has some information about that as well. We've outsourced a lot. It might be worthwhile bringing some of that back in-house to improve efficiency, communication, and the customer service level that we think our residents deserve. And then finally, we are an organization of about 70 FTE. We're probably at that size, that tipping point where we might need a full-time and dedicated human resources professional. So none of those items are in this budget, but I definitely want to plant those seeds that you think about those things going forward. So with that, I'm going to wrap up just by saying, oh, sorry, spoiler alert, we're in good shape. This is a good news budget. I hope that it balances the ambition of the city and our goals, but also is a careful caution and awareness of some of the things that we know we can't control and what's happening out there in the world. We don't know that we're completely over the pandemic. We don't know what economics will look like in the future. But the city has made sound financial decisions in the past. I think we're going to carry that forward, and I think it's going to be a good year. So with that, I just want to thank you for the chance to be your city manager. And I'm going to hand things over to Will. I look forward to working with you in the next couple of weeks. Budget season is my favorite season. So I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you, Will.
Yeah, thank you. So we're gonna get into the 3-year forecast, which is, directed by our financial policies that we include a multi-year forecast as part of our budget process. Really important, I think, to take a step back at the very beginning of the process and think outside of the fiscal year. So make sure we're setting ourselves up for success. We're trying to think through and foresee things that, exceed the bounds of the document in front of you. Just get us on the right trajectory. So I'm gonna go through this. It's a lot of graphs and data. This is the last item on the agenda for today, so please stop me at any point for questions. It'll be as much of a discussion as the group wants it to be. So I'm gonna do the forecast itself, but then also really zero in on some specific trends that we're seeing. And we wanted to call your attention to, again, just as Abigail was wrapping up, not necessarily in your budget documents today, but in our minds as we're moving through this budget process. And we're going to be going through the details line by line in later meetings. This is really that setting the table and thinking long-term portion of the budget process. So this is the general fund revenues. Inflation adjusted, and things are so much better than a couple of years ago. But really just a total flipping of the script. If we remember, we were scenario planning kind of dire scenarios just a couple of years ago. Today, let's see. So in the general fund, it's not going to look the pointer. But if you look at what makes up our revenues, the game is property tax, lodging tax, franchise fees, parking revenues, ambulance fees. The rest of it really just icing on the cake. But those revenue sources really dictate the financial shape of the city. During the pandemic, we saw anything tied to the economic cycle just plummet. Lodging taxes were essentially erased for a period of 3 months. And parking revenues also plummeted and even have not fully recovered yet. The CD reacted quickly. We immediately took a pause in our urban renewal division of tax, stopped segregating funds for our 3 urban renewal districts, release all that value onto the general rolls, helping not only the city, county, 911 district, school district, library, parks, all those things in that period of uncertainty. There was a big bump in property tax, and that was followed on by the American Rescue Plan, which was really that big bulge of constitutes that big bulge of other revenue. But that's one time. It's not going to continue on. Basically, it was a missing puzzle piece that kind of really just made us even, almost exactly, on the amount of revenue that we had lost during the pandemic. Looking forward, and I think this is really where the value of these multi-year forecasts come into place, thinking about what is going to play out over the next 3 years. And one thing is the expiration of the waterfront district. So we received quite a bit of a bump when the urban renewal, the downtown urban renewal district ceased collections. We're going to get another bump of probably roughly the same amount of assessed value onto the general rolls in 24-25. Several $100,000s of new tax revenue into the city. And that's something that we can keep in mind and make sure that we're orienting ourselves now to be ready when that comes 2 years down the road. And then also includes the expectation of, I don't know the exact timing, it will depend on CPI, but there will be an upcoming adjustment for parking fees in sticking with our policies to keep pace with inflation. So they were last increased in 2016 from 75 cents an hour to $1 an hour. The purchasing power of 75 cents in 2016 dollars will probably reach $1.25, maybe sometime in 24 or 25, depending on how quickly inflation So that's built in there as well. Any question on just general fund revenues before I move on to them paired up with expenses?
The amount in the waterfront district that'll come to the general rolls, can you remind me how much that is in
About
24, 25?
about $1 million in assessed value, I expect. And we get about 25 cents of that, so a little less than $250,000 into the general fund.
And if the urban renewal agency decided to expand waterfront, that would push that date back, correct?
It depends how it's done. If it's just a whole scale adding of MI with no change to the boundaries, yeah, it would just push it out. But there's also different ways where we could adjust the boundaries, release a little bit, keep a little bit. A lot of different combinations there.
It looks like the green, the all other gets a little bit fatter in 22.
Yeah, I think that's probably most of them.
It should be ortho, right?
Oh, yeah, oh, yes, yeah, that's
Oh,
our,
okay.
oh, yeah, it gets a lot better. But then it goes back to kind of being that just proportionally low. It still actually gets a little bit bigger in engineering revenues have been coming up. I think that's kind of the biggest piece of why it's minusculely a little bit bigger than where it was in 2014. But yeah, it's that big just infusion of federal cash.
Well, I had a question on the transient lodging tax. I was reading about the proportion of it that goes to the tourism promotions.
Mhm.
Yes. Is that a set percentage? Is we looked at that as a way, like I was just looking at how much it is expanded. And I think about our city and how it's the same size and how, like, whether we really need to spend that much more money on tourism, or is that a place we can use revenue in another way, or is that defined?
Defined. It's set in municipal code at 25%.
Uh-huh.
And state law, if we're actually grandfathered at that proportion. If we were doing a new lodging tax today, state law would require us to put, Grant, checking on this, I think it's 70 or 75%. 70% towards tourist promotion.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then is that, where does that go? Is it like a committee based from here? Is that all private entities out? Like we are obligated to spend that much to whatever businesses to?
Yeah, we're obligated to
Promote?
spend it on tourism promotion.
Mhm.
And so that money is not included, this is just the unrestricted budget tax that's on here. The rest of it gets siphoned up into the restricted revenue fund. And then we've had a contract with the Chamber of Commerce at least since, I believe, 2008, if not earlier, that they are our entity that they facilitate all the tourist promotion activity on our behalf. And they're actually written into our municipal code. It's kind of the designated entity to perform that for the city as well. Not, we don't require to, but they're kind of have a carve out saying they are specifically authorized to.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can you explain the assumptions behind the inflation?
Yeah.
adjustment?
So inflation at 8% now, declining down to about 3% in the out years. I can't remember what the intermediate year I did, so maybe something around 5 or 6%. And the reason for that, I took the graph out, but if you look at, there's a St. Louis Federal Reserve has a whole bunch of data, and one of the things they track is there's a break-even analysis between treasuries that are inflation protected versus treasuries that aren't. And by finding the price parity between the two as to where there's a break even, you have the consensus market analysis of what your long-term inflation rate is. And it's about 3% right now for the 10-year horizon. So I think, and I think that's what everyone believes as well as, it's not, inflation isn't 100% naturally occurring. Federal Reserve has their hand on the wheel, and they will institute actions to bring it down to their target rate of 2% over the long term.
So when you say these are inflation adjusted, what exactly does that mean?
Oh, actual
You
CPI.
answered my first question.
Yeah, actual CPI going back, so real CPI, and then some assumptions going forward. The reason why I did that is it looked like we were just a wash of money if I didn't inflation adjust it. Like the curve was like this, and I was like, that's not it's not how it actually is. So if you inflation adjustment, it really, that is truly the purchasing power of our revenue. And it's much more stable. Growing, certainly growing.
Think so.
Yeah.
When you do that, is that based on Western CPI or just on national CPI?
I do Western.
Western?
Yeah, the Portland specific one was phased out about 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Yep. So pairing that revenue in the blue line to expected expenses and then extrapolating out future fund balances. This graph is. So the expenses are what you have in your budget, assuming that the structural expenses will carry on. Everyone who's employed in this budget will continue to be employed in future budgets, so it doesn't assume any changes, either additions or subtractions. Existing contracts, bargain contracts, which go out multiple years, and then the same inflation assumptions that were built into the revenue. It assumes that the one-time projects that happen in this budget are one-time and don't carry over. And so that's kind of what all feeds into that red line. And the red line does exceed the blue line, but it's because if you look at those new projects and programs, almost all of them are one-time projects. And within our financial policies, it's completely acceptable to use one-time monies for one-time expenses. We need to be structurally balanced, which is ongoing revenues equaling ongoing expenses. And in that case, we are balanced in this budget. And I tried to pull out, I don't know how well it worked, but if there was big slugs of one-time ins or outs, I tried to pull them out, not pull them out of that line graph and just give them colors like a big deposit into our per site account or the ARPA monies. So that you could see pull out some of that noise from the revenue and expense lines. But overall, things are looking good, stable. You know, just as the city manager said, this is a pretty good news budget, especially with a kind of 2-year look out to that waterfront expiration, being a real opportunity to adjust upward the size of the organization. So getting into some important trends. Talked about it a little bit already, but man, it is off the charts. Highest since the early 80s. Just getting about a 8.5% as the most recent year over year. That is not what we earn on our savings. What we earn is about 0.5% right now. So this is the inflation rate as compared to the Oregon State Treasury Department's local government investment pool. Ultra safe, even in the recession, didn't lose value. Goal is to provide a moderate or minimum amount of return to the city. And but if you take the difference between what we're losing in purchasing power versus what we're earning on our investments, the difference is about 8%. I think in your budget book, it's listed as 6.5%. It's because the budget book was written several weeks ago. It's getting worse.
Can we get Jen to move the picture?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
So implicitly what that means is we're losing about 8% of our purchasing power on all the cash that we're holding. And with $18 million in fund balance, that's a sort of hidden evaporation of about $1.1 million and that's real money.
Is there something we should be changing based on that, or do we stick with the super stable pool that I think we're required to be in?
Yeah, we are required. We could go into some longer things, but as rates are increased, we want to be in longer duration securities when rates are decreasing, not increasing. So no, we're basically just have to grin and bear it with this. You know, we may want to think about not carrying so much cash. You know, there are what I'll call real investments. For instance, you know, our solar panels that we put at the wastewater treatment plant carries an ROI of about 6 or 7%. So you know, we can make real investments that have real return to the city, we could consider future funding of our per site account to bend down our cost curve. But you know, the stock market's real volatile right now as well. So, you know, our options are really limited in ways to react to this. But we're definitely monitoring that closely because the only thing we can do, I think, is for certain is cut back on spending if things get too expensive. And the real tough piece is property tax. One more time, it just keeps going over.
And Bill just said he's having a hard time hearing people asking questions, so if you can speak up or have a question, Vicky, he can hear you, but.
Yeah, thanks, Bill, for the feedback. So property taxes are limited in their growth by 3% per year. They overall bottom line will sometimes grow faster than that because of new construction coming on. But existing residents, existing structure of the city as it's built today, the assessed value and the tax revenue only goes up 3% per year, which means anytime inflation is exceeding 3%, property taxes are reducing proportionally in their ability to support existing services. Not too big of a deal in this first year, but if we have prolonged inflation, that's going to be tough because property taxes is still by far our largest single revenue source. Luckily, we do have several others that track almost immediately with inflation. And this is a huge comparable advantage for Hood River versus other Oregon cities. Lodging taxes, marijuana taxes, state shared revenue, which is tied to things like liquor sales, and franchise fees, which is a percentage of revenue for some utilities, all go up immediately when those underlying entities increase their prices. So we are so lucky to have a very well diversified set of revenue sources. Really not many other cities have a diverse set of different types of revenue streams that our city does. So speaking of lodging taxes and how they're trending, I think everyone's always interested in kind of the month-to-month take on lodging taxes. But it also is, I think, a cautionary tale of how susceptible they are to the pandemic. Not only the original onset of the pandemic, which almost eliminated lodging taxes, not our largest, but still our second largest source of revenue. But then the Omicron variant also took a big dent. So we are maybe just another really bad variant from the growth being not as robust as expected. But when there's not a new variant, and there's a lot of pent-up demand from people who've been stuck in their houses for the past year. And so, for instance, in March, just as most recent March, we were up year over year from any prior March by 40%. 40% growth. Amazing. So this could be a real benefit to the city if inflation takes off, because at least we'll have lodging tax to help us out up into the point that if inflation gets too hard, even for households to bear, and they have to start skipping back on discretionary revenue because their gas, their groceries, their rent is taking up a bigger and bigger proportion of their budget. That's a kind of a medium-term risk. So, and then I'm going to get into some of the workforce issues that was introduced. The questions before I move on to workforce?
What, I know our property taxes is capped at 3%. What percentage of our overall property tax is new construction? How much are we adding?
Yeah.
Roughly.
So the bottom line growth increases. It's been increasing about 4.5% to 5% per year.
Okay.
So 3% of that just being the growth and the underlying assessed value, and that's the growth on top of that.
So it's adding. You're saying the new growth is adding 4.5% on, or 1.5% over the 3.
You know, let me. I wonder how quick I can pull it up. Let me just take a put that in the parking lot. I can actually pull up what the growth, what the annual growth rate in in assessed value approach citywide. I've got a spreadsheet on that.
Cool. Do you know if we project that to continue the way it is, or are we reaching that density? I mean, I know we have West Side, which is probably gonna grow us quite a bit, but are we gonna be able increasing density more, or is it not unless we expand the city?
Well, that's the good thing about only looking 3 years out, is because it's not gonna vary too, it's not gonna be too significant, no matter what assumption we use, but I think I have, and I'll double check this as well, about a 4 to 4.5% growth rate, which is, I think, a little bit conservative for property tax growth. But I'll double check that.
Bill, with the Chamber of Commerce, are there any ROI metrics that we get for what the work they do, or do we just give them the money and we trust that they're doing the work?
There's an annual report to council that they need to provide to say what they did, what they think it produced. There's a statewide group, I forgot the name of them, that does kind of a report statewide about spending and growth in taxes, but
Travel Oregon.
What's that?
Travel Oregon.
Travel Oregon, yeah. But I think, and Grant, you can dovetail onto this, I think in any social science sort of in real life atmosphere, you never have a counterfactual. You can never run a pure scientific test of with and without the treatment to know what it's doing. But I don't know, Grant, do you want to? So he's Grant's a hoteler, so he might have another.
Yeah, I've been on the chamber board and this under the board for some time. Chamber board keeps an eye on that stuff and has very direct KPIs and requirements for those funds that have to be met and reportable. If you need any details on that outside of the annual report, you can send a note to Katie. She's the executive director there, and she'll be able to provide you better answers to any questions you may have, or we can chat later more about it.
Okay, great, thank you.
And the city council have a report, when that's gonna be, within the next month? Or is it?
Katie had asked that it be in May this year, but she hasn't confirmed the date. I'm meeting her on Wednesday, so I'll double check.
Okay,
Thanks.
so just, you can tune into that city council meeting, there's a presentation, that's some information.
So Will, with respect to the out projections, did you incorporate the west side, the effect of the west side?
No, that would be outside of the scope, because we'll just be getting it going in 24, 25. And so it'll be maybe several more years even after that. We'll see if it spurs any growth onto the tax rolls. Yeah.
Thank you.
And any growth that does spur will be, segregated, which is maybe what you were getting at, right? Yeah. So inflation, I feel like it clouded the whole presentation, but definitely, I think creates workforce challenges as well. They're over the medium term. We're going to have collective bargaining agreements come up for renewal, and certainly cost of living is a big driver of costs. I'm just so excited about this data set that I got my hands on just a week ago. Took the hire date and separation date for everyone who's worked with us since starting in 2000 to today. And so I could this is actually day by day data of how many regular employees work for the city, going back to 2000. That's why it's all jagged, but I did a trend line to kind of cancel out some of that noise. So we had a nearly 20% reduction in staff going as the Great Recession hit. We at that time closed down one of our buildings. We had this building, plus we operated out of the Butler Bank building. So that was sold because we had fewer staff. And then we really spent the next decade plus slowly and responsibly building back up our staffing levels. And I think really you're seeing kind of a capstone of it with this police officer being one of the last employee groups to get back to their pre-recession staffing levels. But we've, even as we've added some budgeted positions, we're having trouble keeping them filled. Even though we've added a few over the past few years, we really have been stuck at the same level for several years. We have multiple open vacancies right now. So it's for multiple reasons, cost of living. Another one is just we had double the offices when the last time we were at the staffing level. So we've kind of already cannibalized our meeting rooms, doubled up where we can. And that's something we're going to be needing to think about over the next several years. And we're increasingly relying on out-of-town contractors for things like parks maintenance, engineering review, planning review, and then we even have now contract managers managing our contractors at the wastewater treatment plant. So these are all things that sort of are like where we squeeze the balloon, where we can't, we need to grow, but we can't grow staff. And so contract spending. But I think this creates an opportunity to, over the next several years, think critically about this and start laying the groundwork to see whether or not this, reusing some savings if we want to contract out less, plus some new money from the waterfront, and kind of decide. We've kind of over the last decades, we've bounced up against 70 employees, we've bounced up 70 employees. Are we at the point where we're time to resize up from a small city to a medium small city? And I think that's kind of the challenge over the next 3 years. So while we've been contracting out more, also we've been seeing turnover in our employees and have a median tenure. This is how long people have worked for the city. Median tenure nearly dropped in half since 2015, 2016. We're back to kind of where we were in the early 2000s, and obviously when you go through a lot of layoffs, the more junior folks are the ones that see the door first. So that was kind of what pushed up our average tenure a little bit. And as this is the number of employees with 20 plus years of tenure. I was surprised in the early 2000s, we only had a couple that got up to about 10. And then as some folks have left, that's gone down and also been a part of driving down our median tenure. And so these have been correlated, but what's so fascinating, and it's something that really shocked me, is they diverged in 2018. We now have on par with the highest number of employees with 20 years tenure, but also median tenure of all employees equal to back in 2005, 2006, when our number of employees with 20 plus years of tenure was about 3. What that means is we've had a bifurcation of our employee populations. We have a bunch of very new employees and a bunch of very senior employees. And it's not surprising. I think one of the key reasons is that we're challenges we deal with is that folks are having trouble setting down roots, buying houses here. So don't have data on this, but we know from very specific incidents over the last several years of folks living in Boise, Portland, being unable to fill positions, and recruiters telling us that our wages just aren't sufficient for people to relocate here. So this kind of increased reliance on contractors and this maybe higher tenured folks going to the door, on the way to the door over the next 3 to 5 years, leaving folks who haven't been here that long, makes us very brittle and just something I think also something to be addressing in the next several years. So, sorry, getting ahead of myself here. For wrapping that all up, the inflation is concerned. It's still highly uncertain. To your point, Megan, I don't know exactly how we need to react to it just yet. We're becoming brittle. I think are a little like the opposite of resilient with kind of the demographics of our workforce. And I think that could hope if we see continued turnover, that's a lot of institutional knowledge leaving the city, and could be challenging to maintain productivity. Exacerbated by cost of living, contributing factor for sure. But the waterfront district 2 years out creates an opportunity to over the next 3 years, to kind of see how we want to manufacture this new structure of the city that will probably be with us from there on out. One of the key pieces is we can add a police officer, we can add people who aren't tied to a desk, but if they need to work at a computer, if they need a place to sit down regularly, they're just you've reached the absolute maximum on that measure. So, but I do want to say, I was thinking about this. This is kind of a negative way to end it, but let's think back 2 years. At least we're not talking about massive layoffs and a global pandemic. We're thinking about how do we react and be proactive to make sure we have the city that we want to have in a growth mindset. That's a really great position to be in. I think that what I would say we should all take home as kind of the takeaway. So not be scared, not be sort of apprehensive, be grateful that we have a challenge that is surmountable, and then just take it deliberately.
Challenges in the future.
Yeah. That's all I've got for tonight. We'll dig into department by department next week.
So I've got a question. And this is a follow-up on kind of the west side urban renewal district issue, and I know that that's a little bit further out than your projections. But as far as the rationale for ending the waterfront district, providing an opportunity to add employees. When we look at that further, we have some idea about exactly how much that's going to affect our tax rolls.
As far as like limiting them because the growth will be shaved off for urban renewal.
Yeah.
No, that's what we need to get into over the next couple of years. The concept, of course, is that the development isn't happening, will not happen without the policy treatment of urban renewal. I think that holds for the west side because, and Dustin, I think can speak to this next the meeting when we go to planning, but things are locked up on the west side. Inadequate public infrastructure is killing a lot of developments. So I don't think that we're foregoing revenue growth as much as we're unlocking it. And of course, urban renewal is a source of not city employees, but could support its own urban renewal employees to do carry out objectives of the city, like building affordable housing, expanding parks, things that maybe would have been picked up by the general fund if we didn't have the urban renewal agency to do it.
So in your projections too, again, this may be beyond the horizon, if we start adding employees, did you actually account for that in some of your projections? For additional employees?
I only went 3 years on. Yeah. And that I really like that discussion about how far to go out. I see some cities go like 10 years out and just have this like dire, disastrous, and then they do press releases that we have a $5 million deficit, and it never comes to fruition because everything's growth rates. Unless you know specifically something's going to happen, like I can plug in that the waterfront's going to expire, you're assuming something's going to grow at a certain rate or something's going to go at a certain rate, and you're wrong. You're always wrong. That margin of error compounds upon itself as you take it further and further and further out. And so it becomes just completely, I think maybe 5 years could be useful, but only if you have a discrete knowledge of something that's going to happen in that 4th, 5th year that you want to start planning for. But other than that, it's just pulling a formula across a spreadsheet.
Yeah, which is usually why people, when you do that, you start to incorporate the uncertainty associated with your projections and headlines in the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
Kind of identifying the line of the magnitude of your spread.
Oh, sure, yeah, some standard deviation.
Yeah. So what, I guess I'm trying to get at, obviously I think the trend is upward, right? I think you're saying that we're in good shape, spending and the revenues coming in are starting, are pretty much matching one another. But, I guess I'm trying to get at what's the level of confidence, that adding new employees is not going to change that dynamic? You know, obviously there's a growth thing.
Yeah, so I don't have a statistical measure to give you, but I do know, and this is my sort of other spiel with long-term forecasting, is it's also, as you go further out, it's more and more close to at 3 or 4 years out, it's 100% dependent on decisions yet to be made. And so we will course correct. We will, if we add someone and we really value it, then we'll think, then maybe we want to find another revenue source and we decide to prioritize that to support that position, or maybe revenues go down and there's a vacancy and without laying someone off, we just let a vacancy disappear. So many little small course corrections that we can make over the next several years. That's how I could answer that, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, just trying to have the discussion.
Oh, sure.
So with respect to like being up against the kind of the wall with respect to where you can put people, do you have an idea? Maybe this question for both of you and Abigail about where you might expand, how that would work.
I think Will and I have been talking about if we were to build a fire station or a police station at some point, we don't need a second fire station, sorry, police station, then we would have the basement of this building. So is there a temporary solution that we could lease space, or we could look for additional space somewhere that would bridge that gap? Now that's a big if we were to actually build a police station. None of that has been set, but that's one of the areas we've talked about. We've also talked about some staff are able to do some limited hybrid work. Not very many staff. Could we look at that? Is there some way that we could remodel some spaces to be more shared? I don't know that has a very big impact on our staffing. But.
Yeah, I think it's a 1 year out thing. So we've got our staffing now, we're fitting in right now. This is projecting to probably for just laying groundwork for longer term thinking, and maybe next city council goal setting, it becomes priority to do facilities, and then in that year that the waterfront revenue comes on, we're all ready to go, sign leases, pull trigger on construction, whatever it is. Probably not construction, probably sign leases.
And I really appreciate the information about the employee trends, and having, tenured people and the newer people and not as many in the middle, and keeping that congruous group, working together. And I know that we've had in, people that haven't taken jobs because of the housing market, or people that have left because they're going to make more money somewhere else. And so then we're trying to scramble to get someone to come in. I know at least in the police department that's happened, and I think some other departments too. And so I think that just keeping those things in our mind when we do the budget process and we talk about urban renewal, or letting this section go for urban renewal to get some more money in, that's those big picture things. I appreciate you putting that in there, because those are kind of some of the bigger picture things that we need to think about to keep our workforce for the city at a level that works for the city and keeps it, good services for everybody.
Thank you. Exactly what I was
Thank
hoping
you
to
so
do.
much for putting that in there. And I want to thank you ahead of time for putting all those capital improvement projects in the back of the book,
I
the
love it.
pictures. That was fantastic.
That's Haley.
All right, Haley. Because we've always had a big list, but it isn't, the map and then where it is and the dollars, and it's like, wow, that's a lot. When you look at it that way, thank you so much for putting that in there. I appreciate it.
Okay. Any other questions or things to discuss?
Yeah, this is Rudy, if you guys can hear me okay. Hey, I just wanted to congratulate Will and staff for their efforts over the last couple of years. I remember being in this meeting during the pandemic, and how difficult it was, and how uncertain we all were about where revenue was going to go and how to cut spending and not try to overdo it. And I think you guys did an amazing job. All the leadership from Will and all the staff to execute and follow through and hold it all together during a really difficult last couple of years. And I love that this budget is no longer, the scary budget. This is a normal budget, but it's connected to the past, and it's also realistic. So really well done, and thanks for getting us here in the first place.
Thank you, Rudy.
That's great.
Anything else? All right, I'll call the budget committee to recess.
Good job.